It is now time to animate the robot arm. Here's a quick overview of what we'll cover in this video. First, we will adjust Blender's interface for an animation workflow. Next, I will change the rotation of my own starting pose, which is my own preference and is completely optional for you. Then, to prevent any unnecessary keyframes, we will turn off the selectability of all pieces that will not be animated. Finally, we will animate the arm by rotating the pieces into a series of poses, adding keyframes to each pose. When we are finished, the arm will appear to reach out, pick up an invisible object, and place it down in a different location. An actual object for the arm to pick up will be added in a later video. So let's get started. In this video, we're going to be animating our robot arm to do something like this. As you can see, it starts off in our resting position, and then it extends out, and then it opens up the claw, acts like it's picking up something, and then moving it over to a different location, and then going back into its resting position. In the previous two videos, we learned how to connect all the pieces of the arm together in a parent-child relationship hierarchy so that when we move the pieces, they move along with each other. That way we don't have to move each individual piece by itself, only the main parts of the arm and the rest will follow. But as you can see, these keyframes are already set, so let's open up where we left off with our initial resting pose. So here's where we left off last time with our initial resting pose. Now this is the pose that I set in the last video. Yours might be different. It just depends on how you want your robot arm to start. And this is completely up to you. It's your choice. There's no right or wrong answer to this. You can also see my mouse clicks and my key presses over here in case you want to follow along with what I'm pressing. And then I also have the tweak mode enabled up here. So if you click and hold up here and select tweak, that's just an easier selection mode for our purposes here. And then of course, make sure you are in material preview mode, which is this button here. You could be in wireframe or solid shaded mode or even rendered mode. And this is what it would look like. Just make sure you're in material preview mode if you want to see exactly what I'm seeing on the screen here. We also have our hierarchy, our outline over here, with the base, which is starting right here. And then if you open it up, you can see the hierarchy of everything that is a child of different objects. And I don't need this section down here, so I'm just going to hover my mouse over the divider here, where you see the two arrows, click and drag that down just so that we can see all of our objects right here. And next thing I'm going to do is, since we are creating an animation with keyframes, we're going to adjust our timeline here. Let's hover over the divider line here, where you see the two arrows, click and drag up. And then make sure we're still in the timeline, and I'm going to come up right up to the top corner of the timeline to where you see those crosshairs where my mouse cursor is. Then I'm going to click and drag down, and we're just duplicating this area out. So now we have two timelines. I'm going to hover over the divider here, click and drag down, all the way down to where we only see the controls right here. And then with this one, I'm going to select this timeline icon and then choose dope sheet. So we're just changing this area to the dope sheet. This is where we're going to be putting our keyframes. I'm going to go ahead and lower this back down a little bit here. Okay, so now we need to make a keyframe on our starting pose. Now, I think I want to tweak one thing before we get started on the keyframes, and that is the direction of my resting pose, because right now I think it's backwards. So I'm just going to press 1 on the keyboard number pad. And yeah, I don't want it to start this way. I want it to start this way. So I'm just going to take this one, and then let's move up so we can see right above it, and then R to rotate, and I'm just going to rotate that around to something like this. Okay, and I'm just pressing my middle mouse button now, and that rotates the 3D view around whatever I have selected. If you press and hold Shift and then middle click, you can move and pan the whole view around. If you scroll, you can scroll in and out. And that is how I'm going to navigate. You can also use these gizmos up here. This will allow you to rotate and zoom and pan or move the view just like that. Okay, so I'm going to select everything, but if I press A to select everything, you can see it's selecting pieces of the robot arm that are not going to be moving in this animation, such as the base here. So let's change that. We don't want to be able to select things that aren't going to be moving. So selecting the base, we can come over here to our outline, and you can see the base here, and we can uncheck this little cursor icon here that allows us to disable our selection, so now I can't select that base. If you don't see this cursor icon column here, you can come up here to the filters and then just enable that from right here. I'm going to disable a couple of the other ones here too. So I do want to move this and this, but I don't want to move this. So let's go to our joint mid right here, disable that selection. And then I don't want to move this either. I'm going to disable that selection, because we are only going to be moving this one, this one, this one, and this one. Oh, and these here. So now if I hover my mouse over the 3D view, I can press A, and it will select all of them that are selectable. But you can see the ones that are not selectable are not selected. And this is exactly what I want. Next, let's go to frame 1, if you're not on frame 1 already. And in order to move this timeline playhead here, this blue line, you can just click in here where you see the numbers, and you can click and drag that around. You can also click here and drag in this little area, and that moves that timeline playhead. You can also click in here and then type a number, and that's the frame that the playhead will go to. So make sure we're at frame 1, and now hover your mouse over the 3D view, press I on the keyboard, and it will bring you this menu, the Insert Keyframe menu, and we're just going to choose rotation, because we're not going to be animating anything else except for the rotation of these elements. Okay, so we've got our first keyframe on frame 1, and now we're going to go to frame 20, and this is where you can create your second pose. So I'm going to extend this out over here. So I'm going to take this piece, R to rotate, and because we have everything parented correctly and we have all of our axes locked, it rotates exactly how I want it to rotate. So I'm just going to rotate something like this, and then we'll take this piece and we'll press R again to rotate this out a little bit more. And then we're going to take this piece here and rotate it out like that. Okay, let's press and hold our middle mouse button to rotate the view around here. I'm going to press and hold Shift and then middle mouse button to just adjust my view here. So I want this to come down a little bit more, so we'll take this piece and rotate it down. I'm just going to do it right above the grid floor here. Okay, I'm going to take this, rotate that up just a little bit. Okay, good. And now I want it to open like it's about to grab something. Okay, so this is our second pose. Now, be careful. If you move the playhead right now, it will snap back to the original position. So we don't want to move the playhead at all before we make our keyframes. So we press A to select all of them, I, and then click rotation. And now we have our second keyframe. And if we click and drag between the two, it goes from our start pose to the second pose that we set. Pretty cool. Very smooth, just like that. And one thing to note with Blender that's very important is that whenever you press a button, make sure your mouse is hovering over the proper area. So if I press I need to hover my mouse over the 3D view. If I press I over here, it's going to do something different or give you an error. Okay, so we've got our first and second poses animated. Now I'm going to have this clamp down as if it's grabbing an object, which we will add in later. But for now, we're going to do the animation. So we'll say we're going to go 10 frames. Now you can only see 20, 40, 60, 80 here. So if I hover my mouse over here and scroll with my mouse wheel, you can see more of those frames. I can also middle click on my mouse to drag this over, and be careful if you lose your keyframes, don't worry. You can either click in here and just drag down and keep dragging down until you see your keyframes, or if you get lost, just press home and it will zoom into your keyframes. Now, this zooms in way too much here because we only have 2 keyframes, so I'm just going to scroll my mouse button out and readjust those. So let's drag the playhead to frame 30, and this is where I want to have these closed in. Now, I'm at a bit of an odd angle here, so like if I try to rotate this, you can see as the more I rotate it, it like starts going backwards, and it's kind of a little wonky there. So I'm going to right click to cancel that out. The way you get around this is just make sure you are in a better position, and in this case it is from the top. So R to rotate that, and R to rotate that to put this in a more closed claw position. Okay, now A to select everything, I, and then click rotation, and we add our keyframe there. So let's middle mouse to rotate back down and scroll out just a little bit. Shift and middle mouse to pan around. I'm going to middle click in here and drag so we can see all of our keyframes and go back to the beginning. Press spacebar to play, and this is what we have so far. So we have starting position, second position, and then the claw closing as if it's about to pick something up. Now we'll eventually put something here in another video, but for this video we're just going to go through the motions of animation. Alright, next step is to swivel this around here. So we're going to pick it up from here and then we're going to place it over here. So for that one we're going to need this piece here and R to rotate and swivel that around. But before we do that, actually we need to select everything again and bring our playhead to frame 35 and then add another keyframe, rotation. And this is because I want from 30 to 35, I want the robot arm to stand still for just a moment. So you can see that these 2 keyframes are the exact same because you have this orange line that goes in between them, meaning that these 2 keyframes are duplicates of each other and no animation happens in between them, as you can see. So right now we have it starting, extending, clamping down, and then it rests just for a second before it starts to move. So now we can swivel these around here. So let's take this one here and R to rotate, and we're at a kind of a bad angle in our preview, so you can see it kind of glitches out as we try to rotate it. So I'm going to right click to cancel that. Let's just go up into top mode, but before we move that we actually need to move our playhead. So let's middle click and drag in here, and then we'll click and drag this out to about frame, I'm going to say 65. We'll place this here, and now R to rotate that around to something like this. And then again, make sure we're on frame 65, hover our mouse over the 3D view, press A, I, and choose rotation. And now if we drag this, you can see it is now swiveling over to the left, or in the view of the robot arm over to the right. So from the left to the right. But you can see it's just swiveling now. It's just like it's dragging something across the ground, which we don't want. We want it to look like it's picking it up and then placing it down. So let's go to the middle where it's like kind of right in the middle of the swivel, so something about right there, because it starts here and then it ends here, so the middle is somewhere about 49. So we'll do 49. Let's do an even 50. Why not? Easier to remember that way. So at frame 50, I want to make it look like it's picking it up. So I'm going to take this piece, R to rotate that. Just pull that up like this. Take this piece, R to rotate that to maybe something like this. Same thing with this one, because we want to make sure it's parallel to the ground, so it's not tilting anything. And you can pose this however you want, but I think this is good for me. Here it looks like it's picking something up off the ground. So select everything, I, rotation, and now we have a rotation keyframe for that position. So we're coming from frame 35 where it's down on the ground, and as it's swiveling, it's also picking it up in the air, and once it comes back down to this keyframe, it sets it down on the ground. That's exactly what we want. So let's see what we have so far. I'm going to hover my mouse over the timeline or the dope sheet here and scroll out until we can see all of our keyframes. Let's go to the beginning by pressing this button, press the spacebar to play, and now we can see what's happening. Perfect. So we are almost done. We just need to make the claw open again and let go of our invisible object, and then go back to its resting pose. So just like with frame 30 and 35, I want the robot arm to rest here for another 5 frames before it does anything else. So it's like it's setting it down and it's waiting a little bit, make sure everything is steady. So let's go zoom in here. We're at 65, so we just want 5 frames to 70. Now I could select everything and add a keyframe, but because it's going to be the exact same keyframe, just like it is over here, these two are duplicates of each other, I can do this a different way. If I click out anywhere in the timeline to deselect everything, you can see all of them are white, which means they're deselected. And then I'm going to make sure this is the only one that's selected by clicking it, and then that's yellow. Then press Shift D to duplicate that one and move that to frame 70 and left click to set it at frame 70. Now you can see it hangs between frame 65 and 70 on the same position. Perfect. Let's keep going. And then we want to say 10 frames to open. So we're going to go ahead and open these claw fingers here. So let's get into a good position. R to rotate, just like that. A to select everything, I, and rotation, adding our keyframe there. So now we have this. Perfect. And now the last thing is very easy. We want to get back to the resting position that we had at the very start. And instead of trying to guess our position and trying to manually do it, let's do what we just did and duplicate our first keyframe. So let's take our first keyframe only. If we select that, make sure none of the other ones are selected. Shift D to duplicate it and drag it all the way over to, let's say, we'll do frame 100. Nice even frame there. And if we click and drag, you can see it goes back to our starting position. And this is the exact starting position that we had because we copied that keyframe. Therefore, we don't have to do all the hard work trying to guess and move everything back into the exact position, which would be really difficult. Okay, so let's make frame 110 our last frame. So come over here to where it says end, click in here, type 110, enter, and now we can press play and scroll out to see our beautiful handiwork. And it will just continue to loop through here, through our timeline, starting at our start position, then it extends out, clamps down, picks it up, moves it over, lets go, and back to the beginning. And it just keeps doing that over and over again. If we turn off the overlays, we can see a little bit clearer here. And we can move our mouse to do a 360-degree view over it. To see our animation from all different angles. Okay, so that is how you make an animation for a robotic arm that has a child-parent hierarchy with all of the pieces intact and all of the axes locked that we need it to move only a certain direction. In the next video, we're going to place an object on the floor that our claw can actually pick up, and we'll attach it to the claw so that it can pick it up and move it to a different location. So when you're ready, go ahead and head over to the next video.